Hey, it's Kyle here, and today I'll be talking about reading a comic book series for the first time. A lot of people are kind of surprised when they get to know me, especially once they find out I'm really into nerdy stuff. I think they just assume people that are really into nerdy stuff are probably into comic books, especially since like one of my big fandoms, I'm like a huge MCU fan. A lot of the stuff I like have connections with comic books. So when somebody brings that up, I always say like, actually, I've never got into comic books. I actually never read one. First, before I kind of talk about my experience of reading my first comic book series and why I decided to start reading one now, give you a little background why I didn't grow up reading comic books. And the most basic answer is they just weren't really readily available to me. I grew up kind of the northern part of Metro Atlanta, but like right on the edge of the metro area. So when I was growing up, I actually grew up on a farm, but the closest town was about 20, 25 minutes away. It's a decent sized little, suburban city. But that time when I was growing up, it didn't really have a whole lot of shopping and restaurants and stuff. It just had the very basic stuff, like a few grocery stores, Walmart, Kmart, stuff like that. But it didn't really have much beyond that. In fact, I know a few things growing up that I had to deal without was there wasn't a bookstore nearby, so I had to drive a few towns away to the closest bookstore. There wasn't a movie theater. There was a lot of stuff like that that definitely impacted on the amount of access I had to certain content. But one thing my hometown did not have was a store that sold comic books. Now I will say as a caveat, I believe the local Walmart, Kmart maybe had like some very basic comic sections, but I think they were always kind of geared more towards like little kids. And then I also remember as like a little kid, maybe going to like a dentist or a doctor in the kids section, they would have comics, but again, geared towards very, very little kids. So to me, as a kid, I almost connected more comic books with like the comic strips and newspapers that were geared towards very, very little kids. I just didn't really have much connection with them. I didn't really know anybody that was into comic books. As when they growing up, I think partly because there was not a comic book store around us, I didn't really have any friends or like, oh, I'm a big comic book series, you need to check this out. So I wasn't really exposed to it. Now, weirdly, I was aware of stuff that was loosely connected with comic books. For example, I remember vividly when I was in elementary school, I believe in 5th or 6th grade, what trends will happen for kids and stuff like that. For some reason, the big trend that year at our elementary school was all the boys started collecting X-Men cards, almost like basketball or baseball cards, but for X-Men figures. I'd never seen anything about the X-Men, never seen a TV show, cartoon, watched a movie, never definitely had read a comic book series. But I, like all the other kids, got really into these X-Men cards and bought several that were being sold at Walmart, Kmart. So there was some loose things I had connections with comic books, but just never got into them. As I got older and I became more aware, like, oh, comic books actually now are just not just geared towards little kids. There's some really cool, elaborate stories. And I got into stuff that dealt with comics. Like I was huge superhero movies fans, and then I began to learn like, oh, there's Star Wars comics and all this other stuff. But there still wasn't a comic book store like around where I lived, although it was starting to become a little bit easier to find them. But the flat out reason why I didn't get into comic books as I got older was I felt like I already had enough nerdy habits. I really wasn't looking to pick up another nerdy hobby. I read a ton, watched a lot of movies, TV shows, really into like history and stuff, so studying history. I just felt like I have enough nerdy hobbies, play video games, all that type of stuff. I'm just not really looking for anything else. Like if anything, there's more books I'd like to read and stuff like that. So that just kind of fell into that little bit of a pattern. Now, as I got older, I became aware that like Star Wars comics were a bigger thing than I realized. As I got kind of involved in YouTube and reviewing books online and following other Star Wars book reviewers and stuff like that, I became aware a lot of those other people were also really into Star Wars comics, and they spoke very, very highly of them and how they would complement a lot of times the book series that were stuff were going on. And I go, well, maybe I should start getting into Star Wars comics, but with the Disney's purchase of Star Wars and their publication initiatives afterwards, it came down to a simple reason why I just hadn't gotten Star Wars comics. there's so many Star Wars books coming out now. I felt like, one, I want to read more than just Star Wars stuff. I just don't want to read Star Wars books and Star Wars comics, because I felt like if I delved really head first into the comic book series, I would just be reading Star Wars stuff. And I love Star Wars, but I want to read other stuff. I want to read other sci-fi, other fiction, other nonfiction. I love reading nonfiction history. And I was afraid if I really got into the Star Wars comics, I just wouldn't have any time left. Then the second was money. The Star Wars books, a lot of them come out, so it ends up not being cheap. So I was like, I don't know if I'm really looking for another Star Wars thing to spend money on. So that had always come down to is time and money, just not getting into Star Wars comics. So I figured, being such a huge Star Wars fan, if I ever got into comic books, it's probably going to be my gateway would be in Star Wars. So that leads to why have I finally started reading a comic book series. This relates to the latest kind of book series that Star Wars is doing, the High Republic series. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of set a few hundred years before the events of the prequel movies. It's kind of covering the golden age of the Republic and of the Jedi Order. And it's been an amazing series. The books are awesome. I've actually loved them. Some of the best Star Wars content that's ever been published, in my opinion. And in a few of the early books, one of the main characters, who was actually somewhat of a side character, wasn't one of the main characters, kind of a secondary character, was this Jedi Porter Engle, who's this mysterious figure in the books. He's kind of an elder Jedi who kind of cooks and takes care of the other Jedi. But the other Jedi are constantly telling all these stories. Well, like, oh, when Porter was younger, he was actually the most fearsome warrior the Jedi have ever produced. He's the best lightsaber fighter ever. He's almost just like the Jedi almost spoke of him like he was a superhero. And I was very interested in this Jedi that the other Jedi were in complete awe of. So when they were starting the next phase of this High Republic series, they announced they were going to do a comic book series for Porter Engle. And I was like, he quickly was one of my favorite characters in Phase 1. I was like, I really want to know more about him. Maybe now is the time to check out some Star Wars comics. And now my hometown does have a comic book store. So I have got the first two issues of the Porter Engle series, which is titled The Blade. That's kind of his nickname. So here's issue 1, issue 2. And I have really loved him so far. It's, now, part of it, I am biased. I love the character Porter so much that I just wanted more info on him. And so far, the first 2 issues have not disappointed. He is super interesting. He's becoming more interesting as they explore more of his backstory in this comic book series. I'm definitely committed to read this comic book series. Loving the storyline, loving how the comics can kind of tell a story in a different manner than a book, which I'm usually used to doing in Star Wars. Obviously a lot more visual, getting some things you just couldn't normally do in a book series, which is where I, again, normally read my Star Wars content. Now, if you ask me at this moment, Kyle, do you think this will get you into other Star Wars comics, or just comic books in general, or are you just going to confine yourself to this series? I don't know yet. I'm definitely committed to reading this series. There's other comic book series that are being published in relation to High Republic. I might check those out. But I think for now, I'm going to focus on this first series, The Blade, see how I enjoy it as it kind of evolves, and then make a decision from there. Like, I'm not going to commit to reading more comic books. So that's where I am in my comic book journey as a new reader of comic book series. In the comment section below, let me know what are some of your favorite comic books, be it either Star Wars or non-Star Wars related. Who knows, maybe I might be delving into this nerdy interest, so I might want more info on that. Have you read the Blade series yet? If so, let me know what you think. It is awesome. I don't want to get into too much of it because it just has come out, so I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I'll just say, if you enjoyed Porter Engle in the book series, you'll love the comic book series. If you haven't read the books, I think you can read these comic books, and it doesn't rely on you knowing anything about him in the future, so I think you'll still really enjoy it. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you the next time, and may the Force be with you.